You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 18th of October 2013. Hungrier than ever, Britain's use of food banks triples. 1 in 5 marriages a sham. Council bans cabbie's small St George's flag sticker. Nick Griffin MEP, Lampedusa and Adolf got it wrong. Greece strips the 3 Golden Dawn MPs of immunity. Sicily declares emergency over migrants. Bulgaria, government panics over refugees. 29.8 million people in modern slavery globally. Palestinian waste €2 billion in aid and some goes to Palestinian terrorists. While US argues Germany faces budget surplus. Thought for the day, Boy George, too much foo young on the brain. And finally, Viva l'Anglaise, a Euro laugh. Before we start the news, I'd like to thank both the South West and South East regions for a great start to our Euro fundraisers in the South. They both went off without a hitch and lots of shekels were raised for the cause. Thank you again to all the organisers and members who made them happen. UK news. Hungrier than ever, Britain's use of food banks triples. The Trussell Trust reveals 350,000 people have received emergency handouts since April, while government poverty czar Frank Field condemns figures as shocking. The number of people resorting to food banks for emergency help to feed their families has more than tripled following the squeeze on benefits which intensified in April. David Cameron's own poverty czar warned last night of the danger of food banks becoming an institutional part of the welfare state and urged the Prime Minister to set up an inquiry into the issue. Frank Field, a welfare minister under Labour, told The Independent he was shocked by the steep increase in their use and added, "Something very serious is happening to people at the bottom of society." The Trussell Trust, the country's biggest food bank operator, said it distributed food to 355,985 people, including nearly 120,000 children, between April and September, compared with 113,264 during the same period in 2012. It handed out food to more people during those 6 months than in the whole of 2012, the Trust said. World at 8 stated, "As long as it's people at the bottom of our society that are benefiting from these food banks, that's okay. Without being labelled racist, many newcomers are far better off here than in their own countries and shouldn't need food banks. In fact, in a perfect world, we shouldn't need food banks either. Perhaps immigration doesn't benefit our society in the way our governments always say. When were food banks introduced to the UK? Only since immigration went up, I fear." 1 in 5 marriages a sham. Around 20% of weddings in urban areas are bogus, it's claimed, as figures show the number of reported cases stands at 1,800. In an interview with Sky News, Mark Rimmer, the chairman of the Local Registration Services Association, said 20% of weddings in urban areas were suspicious, the worst it has ever been. Home Office figures show the number of reported cases has tripled in the last 3 years, to 1,800. But Mr Rimmer said the number of sham marriages, which were likely an attempt to gain residence in the UK, reported to the authorities was tip of the iceberg, and that official figures are a drop in the ocean compared with the full scale of the problem. World at 8. More for our benefit system and food banks. Council bangs cabbie's small St George flag sticker. Taxi driver Denise Syed's car sticker could mean her losing her licence because it may discriminate. Denise has 3 English flag signs stuck on doors and boot of her car and local driver printed on them, but apparently Teignmouth Bridge Council in Devon had one complaint about stickers. Council officials said the stickers would leave anyone who is not English at a disadvantage in their day-to-day life and are not acceptable, and they will not renew her licence in February unless the stickers are all removed. Self-employed Denise, who was married to a half Maltese man for 16 years, says the stickers on her Volkswagen Touran people carrier are not offending anyone. World at 8. What a ridiculous thing for a local council to bother about. Judging by her name Saeed, her ex-guy was more than half Maltese, bless him, and good luck to her. She is a local driver. Get over it. And concentrate on who made the complaint. Now I hand you over to Nick Griffin, MEP, and he talks today about Lampedusa, the truth, and the fact that Adolf got it wrong.
Groundless but anguished guilt, genuine sorrow, and a huge dose of opportunist hypocrisy. That's been the reaction in Brussels this week to the news of the accidental sinking of another boatload of illegal immigrants off the coast of the tiny Italian island of Lampedusa. I visited Lampedusa a couple of years ago and saw for myself some of the endless stream of Africans and Arabs being bussed off to the refugee reception centre after their overladen boat managed to wallow into the harbour. I spoke with locals about the crime, squalor and disruption that the thousands of new arrivals bring to their small community. I discussed the situation with the mayor, the dark-haired giant of a man who told me that wave after wave of illegals were being shipped over to the Italian mainland, where most are then given coach tickets to France, stepping stone for many to the soft-touch social security paradises of Britain and Scandinavia. On my return, I was interviewed by a typical left-liberal bleeding heart enthusiast for mass immigration and the destruction of Western culture. He asked how I would stop so many of the would-be immigrants from dying miserable deaths as boats sink in Mediterranean squalls or from sheer overloading. I told him that, if the countries of Europe had nationalist governments, we would stop the international banks from looting the entire world, including Africa. That would reduce the pressure of poverty and reduce immigration. I told him we would encourage the Africans to resist the land and raw material grabs of ruthless global corporations and sovereign wealth funds, because they're pushing subsistence and small farmers off the land in favour of agribusiness operations, growing crops for export, is pushing up food prices, hunger and even starvation in Africa. Dealing with that problem would relieve the pressure of poverty and reduce immigration. I pointed out that the leaders of many African countries, including Nelson Mandela, have repeatedly begged Britain and other Western countries to stop poaching their doctors and nurses, because having to pay to train them, only to see them emigrate to the West, is crippling their healthcare systems. That leads to desperation to move to get better healthcare in the West. So stopping this selfish scandal would relieve the pressure of poverty and reduce immigration. I explained that many of the boats used to ferry thousands of immigrants from Africa across the Mediterranean or up the west coast of Africa to Atlantic islands of Spain belong to fishermen whose subsistence livelihoods are being wiped out by industrial fishing fleets from all over the developed world. Stop that, and not only would fish stocks be saved from extinction, but local people could go back to making a decent livelihood for themselves and their families, and they wouldn't have to sell their now idle boats to people smugglers or join the desperate trade themselves. But what if they still kept coming? Asked Mr. Bleeding Heart. How can we stop them dying? Surely we must open our doors to them. No, I explained as gently as I could, because of course he's brainwashed. The West is not merely the originator of the modern world civilization, it's now also its lifeboat. With billions facing starvation as resources are overwhelmed by population, the lifeboat will be swamped if the crew don't recognise the reality of the situation. Furthermore, it's precisely the act of letting them in, of allowing them to come to Britain and other white nations, and to push our own poor to the back of housing waiting lists, and to burden our workers with even more taxes, that makes it worth their while risking their lives on the crossing to Europe. It's your charity that tempts these people to their deaths, I told both him and MEPs in the chamber for a debate on the issue not long after I was elected back in 2009. If the political elite really want to help these poor people, as opposed to using their desperate plight as yet another excuse for a mass immigration wave deliberately calculated to complete the destruction of traditional identity and social cohesion in our countries, then they need to do the things I suggested to help reduce African poverty, thereby reducing the push factor. Then they need to turn off the welfare tap in order to reduce the pull factor. And finally, they need to declare that the borders of Europe are indeed closed, that anyone trying to cross them illegally will immediately be sent back to their place of origin. But they'll still come, Bleeding Heart told me, and thousands will die every year trying. So do you really want to save them? I asked him. Of course, he said. Then you need to sink one or two of those boats right on the shore of Libya, I said. His shock seemed genuine. And drown them? No, I said. Throw them life jackets, but make it clear that they will never get to Europe, so there's no point trying. Then they'll stay at home, and if they want a better life, they'll have to work to reform and to build their own countries, just as our ancestors did when they faced poverty, exploitation, and misrule by the rich. Don't accuse me of being cruel and wanting to drown innocent people, I warned him. That's being done by people like you, liberals who would use other people's money to give the poor of Africa the false hope of a better life in our country. You are the Pied Pipers, luring them onto those boats. My way, if things went wrong, could drown a few dozen. Once. Your way is drowning tens of thousands every single year. I said much the same in Parliament too, which is how Margaret Hodge got the idea of telling Africans embarking in the 2010 general election that I would throw them and their children into the sea from helicopters, when what I actually had said was that we should throw them life jackets, but wouldn't let them have council houses embarking. The tragic events of the last week or so have, of course, proven me right. The hope of making it to Europe has been revealed yet again as a deadly mirage. Truly, the road to hell is paved with good intentions as well as bad ones, and both are present in abundance in Brussels and Strasbourg, Westminster and the BBC. The scenes from Lampedusa and the guilt-ridden, cowardly reaction of the political and media elites to them revealed something else, a terrifying glimpse of one all too possible version of the future. Because the vast majority of commentators and legislators seem to have come down on the side of the argument that says, we can't leave people to die, so if they're that desperate, we have to open the doors to them. Which, of course, is in reality nothing more or less than surrender to moral blackmail. Adolf got it wrong, it would seem. Instead of planning Operation Sealion with tanks and rifles and Stukas, he should have made the Wehrmacht black up and put on loincloths, then got them to paddle across the channel on homemade rafts. Hundreds of thousands of them, all primed to ask for a nice house, complete with all new furniture, kitchen equipment, phone cards and everything else specified in the Home Office's joint tenancy agreement, which sets out what landlords and councils have to provide for asylum seekers and refugees, with our tax money. There's no point pretending otherwise. Let's get this straight. Whether it's facilitated by guns or guilt, an invasion is an invasion. And the response to the news from Lampedusa tells us that, under the present ruling elite, the Third World invasion that has already transformed vast swathes of British and European cities will not stop. Indeed, it's going to speed up, as the ever-rising population and poverty of the Third World produces an endless flood of would-be immigrants, increasingly confident that the rulers of the West have lost the will to defend our borders and our indigenous communities. If you really can't see where the logic of the Bleeding Hearts will end, or if you want a book to lend to people who can't see it, then go visit the Excalibur website and buy yourself a copy of Camp of the Saints by the late French author Jean Raspail. The Camp of the Saints is one of the most uncompromising, brilliant works of 20th century literature, tackling as it does the taboo subject of race, the Third World, and the future of the white race. It's a truly prophetic work of literary genius. If you haven't read it, buy it now. Incidentally, having been very critical in recent weeks of the Jewish supremacism of the Zionist warmongers who deform and corrupt mainstream political discourse throughout the West, let me in fairness point out that this novel, which inspired a whole generation of Front National activists in French, went on at the time to have a big impact in the English-speaking world through the translation by a Jew, Norman Shapiro. The crackpot anti-Semites who delight in pointing out the Jews involved in things that harm our people, the Rothschilds, Warburgs and Trotskys and their ilk, while keeping silent about those who do good and about those who aided and even financed their heroes Mussolini and Hitler, do the cause of truth and justice no good at all. Raspail sets his novel at the end of the 20th century, or the beginning of the 21st, around the present time in fact. In Calcutta, a crowd of people has gathered outside the Belgian consulate to press their children forward for inclusion in the adoption programme that would rescue them from a life of poverty by relocating them with families in Belgium. When the consul declares the programme has ended, a giant, bearing a deformed monster with lidless eyes, a flap of skin for a mouth, and stumps for arms on his shoulders, harangues the swelling crowd by reciting for them a parable about the Hindu gods taking the little Christian god down from his cross and exacting his kingdom from him in return for his life. He quotes from the book of Apocalypse. The nations are rising from the four corners of the earth, and their number is like the sands of the sea. They will march up over the broad earth and surround the camp of the saints and the beloved city. Inspired, the Indian crowd presses onto the docks and commandeers a rusty old liner, the India Star. In no time, the popular example has been imitated up and down the Ganges, until a fleet of 100 ships, carrying 1 million people between them, sails for Europe, the land flowing with milk and honey. The West very soon learns of the fleet's departure and its intended destination. The governments of Europe are terrified of the thought of 1 million impoverished Third World refugees landing on their shores. But the beast that has been subverting the West for the past 2 or 3 centuries is eager to accept this latest Trojan horse and exploit its possibilities for further subversion and destruction. The media, the churches, the educational and cultural establishments, the trade unions, most of government itself, all are united in their determination to welcome what the revengeful Ben Saud, an Algerian immigrant himself, now enjoying an immensely lucrative career as a left-wing journalist under the name of Clement Dio, dubs the Last Chance Armada, in the name of the brotherhood of man and of Christian charity and love. In its introduction, Raspail wrote that many of the speeches and editorials he quotes in his fictional book are in fact lifted from real-life examples of European elite ethnomasochism and surrender. The reader today can certainly see the realism of the 40-year-old novel when the President of the French Republic, though on the quiet a patriot, cannot bring himself to announce firm opposition to the looming invasion. As the Ganges fleet approaches closer to Europe, the propaganda campaign on its behalf swells, even as the ordinary people of France flee northwards. And then, at midnight, as Saturday passed into Sunday, the first minute of Easter, the day of the resurrection, a great noise was heard along the coast, somewhere between Nice and Saint-Tropez. The prows of 99 ships plunged headlong onto the beaches, and between the rocks, as the monster child, waking from his cataplectic sleep, let out a triumphant cry. All over the globe, gathering hordes from the Third World watch and emulate the Indian Armada. Thousands of unarmed Chinese peasants push against the barbed wire borders of Russia, while in Britain and America, vast immigrant demonstrations prepare to paralyse and seize the major cities. All eyes are on France, for if France resolves to live, the rest of the white world may follow suit. But if France surrenders, it will all be over. What happens? Well, if you want to know what happens in the book, you must read it. Alwyn Deacon tells me he has at present just 4 copies left, so be quick with that visit to Excalibur. I promise you it's well worth it. I read it when I was about 15, and it's one of the things that determined the course of my life. Because, in the camp of the saints, Raspail demonstrates truly visionary powers in his understanding of the process by which key elements in Western society, ranging from hate-filled Marxists to greedy capitalists, combine naturally with aggressive external forces to cooperate in the destruction of the Western world. The threatened death of the West is as much or more a Western project as it is a Third World one. While we can rightly bemoan the impact of Wahhabi money speeding the Islamisation of our cities, or the distortion of our culture by the anti-European racism of Jewish supremacism, if the West does die, it will, in the final analysis, be a case of suicide rather than murder. For we are the many, and the nation wreckers who are to hand our homelands over to Third World invasion are the few. The destruction of the West could never be accomplished by 100 last chance armadas alone, so long as the West retained a sense of its own identity, its nerve and its self-confidence intact. Only a society which is already sick would have consented to swallowing the resistance-rotting poison of Freud, Marcuse and the madmen of 1968. As for what happens in real life, it could still turn out very differently. The first gigantic change since the late 60s and early 70s, when Raspail wrote his dark defeatist classic, is that Russia, in the book still a Soviet state, has woken up and gone a long, long way to throwing off the white suicide mentality. The second is the internet, a medium which, despite the frantic efforts of our enemies to control it and censor it, has at present radically shifted the balance of power in the realm of ideas, in our favour. Liberalism and surrender still dominate the mainstream, lamestream media, but fewer and fewer people watch or read or listen to such drivel anymore. Ideas are being shaped by the rough, raw power of the truths and conspiracy theories that slosh around the web, the new collective consciousness of our people. If enough activists and nationalist militants heed Raspail's warning, it may well still not be too late, for something of huge historical importance is clearly being born as the peoples of the West throw off their tired old acceptance of rule by corrupt elites who would happily see our world go under as long as they could be the last ones to drown. Current growing support for the Front National certainly suggests that La Belle France does not want to commit suicide. Let's hope that proves to be the case, and let us redouble our efforts to overcome the very special extra handicaps we have here in Britain, particularly our appallingly undemocratic first-past-the-post election system and the gruesome alliance of the BBC and Nigel Farage, and to build, in spite of everything, the effective nationalist organisation that can give our people the same choice that the French now at least appear to have. To surrender and vanish under the old left liberal capitalist combination of treason, cowardice and greed, or to stand up and reclaim our heritage, and while we're at it, help save thousands more from dying off the coast of Lampedusa by turning to nationalism and the new dawn.
Thank you, Nick. Very thought-provoking for the weekend, and all very true. European news. Greece strips 3 Golden Dawn MPs of immunity. Greece stripped 3 members of parliament from Golden Dawn Party of legal immunity on Wednesday, clearing the way for the politicians to face charges of belonging to a criminal organisation. Sicily declares emergency over migrants. Sicily has declared a state of emergency because of the large number of migrants arriving to Europe by crossing the Mediterranean Sea. More drones, warships and helicopters were deployed on Tuesday to patrol the coasts. Some 32,000 asylum seekers have landed in Italy and Malta so far this year. World at 8, this is just the beginning. Bulgaria, government panics over refugees. Bulgarian authorities are preparing a series of emergency measures in response to the growing refugee crisis, reports SIGA. According to the Daily, the Ministry of Interior is to receive an additional 27 million leva, that's 13.5 million euros, of which 5 million will be for the construction of a 30-kilometre long wall on the border with Turkey close to El Ovo. Sega points out that 6,503 refugees, many of them Syrians, have arrived in the country in recent months. A further 10,000 to 20,000 refugees are expected in the coming months. World at 8 comments, "It must appear quite easy to recreate within Europe the country that you have left in so-called fear and trembling, mustn't it? Just arrive there and let us idiots do the rest." World news. 29.8 million people in modern slavery globally. African countries dominate a new global index on slavery, with 38 of the 50 nations where the scourge is at its worst found on that continent. The Global Slavery Index, released Thursday, estimated that nearly 30 million people remain enslaved globally, millions of whom are in Africa. Mauritania has the poorest record, with some 150,000 people in a population of 3.8 million held captive, many of whom inherited their status from their parents. But all slavery is not African. India has the highest number of slaves, according to the index, with nearly 14 million, but it ranked 4th in terms of prevalence. In terms of prevalence, Mauritania leads at number 1, Haiti is number 2, India number 3, Pakistan number 4 and Nepal comes in at number 5. The index was created by Walk Free Foundation, an anti-slavery organisation. In 2013, modern slavery takes many forms and is known by many names, the report said. Whether it's called human trafficking, forced labour, slavery or slavery-like practices, a category that includes debt bondage, forced or servile marriage, sale of or exploitation of children including in armed conflict. Victims of modern slavery have their freedom denied and are used and controlled and exploited by another person for profit, sex or the thrill of domination. Palestinian wastes €2 billion in aid and some goes to Palestinian terrorists. Questions will be raised in the Dutch Parliament over whether EU subsidies to the Palestine Authority go to terrorists. Yossi Dagan, Vice Chairman of the West Bank Regional Council, said 40% of the EU subsidies to the Palestine Authority is spent on salaries of convicted Palestine terrorists. He told a meeting of Dutch MPs that these terrorists each received €2,000 a month. At the same time, the Sunday Times is reporting the Palestinian Authority has wasted nearly €2 billion in European aid through corruption and mismanagement. According to a not yet published report, the European Court of Auditors has found significant shortcomings in audits of €1.95 billion spent in the West Bank and Gaza between 2008 and 2012. World at 8. So much for the Palestinian whinings, so much hot air. While US argues, Germany faces budget surplus. While politicians in the United States argue about spending cuts, deficits and the debt ceiling, Germany faces a different discussion. What do we do with a looming budget surplus? The country's strong economy means it will take more in tax revenue than it will spend next year for a third straight year, a group of top economic institutes said in a twice-annual report Thursday. Germany will continue to run surpluses to 2018 if tax and spending practices remain the same. Germany took steps in 2003 to significantly cut the cost of labour and employee benefits to businesses. German unemployment is low at 5.2% and the business climate has improved due to the easing of market tensions over debt levels in other Euro countries such as Spain, Italy, Greece, Portugal and Ireland. Thought for the day: Boy George and too much Fu Young. Following our chairman's marvellous report will be hard, but I'm keeping it very short and somewhat dim. You may wonder why dim. Well, in the light of the national grid and having power cuts similar to the ones in the 70s, and the wonderful news that we will all be kowtowing to China, who apparently will now be encouraged to take stakes in British power plants. Is Osborne mad? What happened to him in China? Admittedly, Boris the Loris could be put in the panda pen, so similar is he to this animal, but Osborne? Someone has made a very good impression on him over there, haven't they? First the visa debacle and now the yellow peril are taking over one of our power sources, and the word Chernobyl springs to light. Unfortunately, it makes fracking and coal mines even more appealing to me, as the last thing I would want is the sodding Chinese having anything to do with our nuclear reactors financially or staff-wise or, in fact, anything. They, along with the Qataris, Saudis and Europe, practically own our arses anyway, so what is it with this great Chinese giveaway? Well, Osborne may be a prat, but he is a greedy prat who thinks that the answer to our national debt and global recession is for other countries to support us. Unfortunately, he doesn't realise that the Chinese, even more so than Shylock in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, will demand and take their pound of flesh. Just listen to the Daily Mail report. Daily Mail comment: power failure leaves us at mercy of China. George Osborne yesterday announced that, for the first time, the UK will allow Chinese companies to take a stake in British nuclear power plants. Yesterday, an alarming report prepared for the Prime Minister warned of the grave danger of lights going out in Britain as early as next year. The Royal Academy of Engineering said the closure of older power plants and the pathetically slow progress in building replacements was likely to stretch the system close to its limits in 2014-2015. To add further insult, the study was released as British Gas hiked prices for its 9 million domestic customers by 9.2%. Families are now paying an average £1,444 a year for gas and electricity, yet, incredibly, they cannot even be given a basic guarantee that their future energy needs will be met. Just how desperate the situation has become was demonstrated by George Osborne yesterday, announcing that, for the first time, the UK will allow Chinese companies to take a stake in British nuclear power plants. Indeed, to secure the investment of this communist dictatorship, the Chancellor said Chinese firms might eventually be allowed to take majority stakes. Mr Osborne will need no reminding of the dangers of handing control of critical national infrastructure to a foreign power, let alone a country with an appalling record for human rights and corruption that regularly launches cyber attacks against the UK. Now that says it all. Our so-called politicians, having allowed the unions and bad housekeeping to create this problem, are selling off the country's infrastructure to try to placate the people, and it won't work. I personally don't care if our immigrants are warm or catered for, but I do care that our young and elderly are looked after, warm and not having to make a choice of food or heat. It might well be that we have to accommodate fracking for a short while and reopen our coal mines. Our party have known for some time that peak oil problem was in the offing and of course, as usual, have been ignored. I would state that instead of putting finances into benefits for newcomers, fiddling immigration figures so that the British public remain ignorant, keep raising the foreign aid budget, we should have put more money into our water, gas and electric companies and made them repair and replace old and faulty lines, pipes and parts before the foreign investors got their hands on them. Because foreign investors only want financial returns from their investment. They are not concerned with whether Joe Bloggs can pay the bill or that poor Mrs So-and-so is starving. They will just want their money or power, and the Chinese will want both, and quickly. Bad idea, Osborne, very bad idea. Too much Fu Young on the brain. And finally, vive l'anglaise, a Friday laugh. Now this is a true story reported by an English guy who was stopped and asked to give a breathalyzer test. The English guy lives near La Bouge in the Dordogne, and at the same time he was stopped he was as pissed as a fart. The gendarme signals to him to wind down the window, then asks him if he has been drinking, and with a slurring speech the English guy replies, "Yes, this morning I was at my daughter's wedding, and as I don't like church much, I went to the cafe opposite and had several beers. Then during the wedding banquet I seem to remember downing 3 great bottles of wine, a Corbière, a Minivois and a Fougère. Then to finish off the celebrations and during the evening, me and my mate downed 2 bottles of Johnny Walker's Black Label." Getting impatient, the gendarme warns him, "Do you understand I'm a policeman and have stopped you for an alcohol test?" The Englishman with a grin on his face replies, "Do you understand that I'm English, like my car, and that my wife is sitting in the other seat at the steering wheel?" You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart, and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe weekend.